There we go.
Hey everyone, welcome. Thanks for being here tonight. We are so excited to present the stunning visual tour of native California wildflowers. We're going to wait a couple of minutes as people trickle in.
I'm down some.
And I would love to have you all in the chat box. Tell us what your favorite wildflower is. You can also tell us what part of the country you're joining us from too. It's great to have you all here tonight. I'm thinking about what my favorite wildflower is, and it's kind of hard to pick just one. But if I had to narrow it down to just one, I would say lupin. I'm curious about our panelists and presenters. Does anybody want to share their favorite wildflower?
I love that coastal poppy, Scholzia meridima, like that little low, sweet guy, and also baby blue eyes.
Allison, do you want to let me know when we have most of our participants logged on, and then we can get started?
Sure. Still got some folks joining. Still got about almost at 50 folks. So thanks for being here. I'm also partial to lupin, I must say.
So lovely.
One of my favorites.
Columbine are mine, whether they're the mountain columbines or the red ones we find here in Marin County. And then Rob's is the desert candles, which you'll get to see this evening.
What else I was thinking? There's all the lilies.
Yeah, well, for us, it's like asking what our favorite child is. Who our favorite child is.
If we had them.
I also really love yarrow. Yarrow has always been one of my favorites. It's such a useful plant as well as being beautiful.
Do you make tea from it?
Yeah, I made tea from it. You can use it as a coagulant too. If you're out in the field and you cut yourself, you can chew on a leaf and wrap it around your finger, and it really stops your bleeding. It's a great first aid plant.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And it smells so nice too.
Got some great answers coming in from the chat. Folks are joining us and sharing their favorites. Phacelia in the Carrizo Plain. Also smells really good in addition to being beautiful. Brodea, Blazing Stars, California poppies.
Up the
Yeah.
azalea, western azalea.
More Phacelia. Baby blue eyes, Columbine. Goldfields. Yeah, if you're just joining us, we're sharing our favorite California native wildflowers in the chat. There's no wrong answer.
Yeah, somebody mentioned the smell of the phacelias in the Carrizo Plain. One of our favorites for smell is the western azalea. That smells like perfume. Good perfume.
Ooh, calypso orchids. Those are beautiful. You'll see that in there too.
Looks like we're kind of slowing down with folks joining us. It seems like we could go ahead and get started, and we might have some more folks hop on as we go.
Great. Well, before we get started, I'd like to thank the City of Petaluma for making this webinar possible. And thank you all for being here tonight. We're really excited to present you with these stunning photos and stories.
I'm happy to be here.
Oops. Before we go to our exquisite tour of Wildflower Meadows, followed by a conversation with our panelists on how to replicate these stunning meadows in your own space, I want to give a brief introduction of Daily Acts. I'll also introduce our presenters, Nita Winter and Rob Badger, and go over some Zoom etiquette. My name is Annie. I'm a Senior Programs Coordinator at Daily Acts. Daily Acts is a holistic education nonprofit that takes a heart-centered approach to inspiring transformative actions that create connected, equitable, and climate-resilient communities. We believe
What happened to Sue?
I'm having issues changing slides. Sorry, guys. We believe in the power of our daily actions to reconnect people to self, community, and place, which helps to heal our society and our planet. Oh my goodness. Bear with me here for a sec. So the chart that you see is our theory of change. We spread solutions and models to live with a lighter footprint. Because change happens through collaboration, we also invest in strengthening community leadership. This includes our Leadership Institute, the North Bay Environmental Health Network, and most recently, the Eco to School program for high school students. These efforts consolidate into building public will and public and political will by mobilizing our community's power towards environmental and climate justice policies. Our impact over the last 18 years has been to create solutions and models that ripple through our community, catalyzing action, building community, and supporting leaders to boldly advocate for a brighter future. We always like to start our presentations with a quote, and this is one of Daily Act's favorite quotes. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. So I'll go over a little bit of Zoom etiquette. Use the chat box to share statements with the whole group. Make sure you have it set to everyone, not just panelists or host. Use the Q&A to share questions you have coming into this webinar. Feel free to add any questions that might come up for you throughout our webinar. Rob and Nita are here to answer questions as well as our panelists, and we'll take those questions at the very end. We'll also have resources and links that will drop in the chat box throughout the webinar, and those will be sent to you as well as a link so that you can view this webinar later in the follow-up thank you email. Right. So Nita and Rob are internationally acclaimed conservation photographers who have been photographing wildflowers throughout the West for 27 years. Their work has been seen in galleries, museums throughout California, and featured in publications such as Natural Home, Sunset, Sierra, and Times Magazine, the New York Times, Los Angeles Times, and the Washington Post. Rob and Nita were recently recipients of the Sierra Club's 2020 Ansel Adams Award for Conservation Photography. They have created this 12-time award-winning book titled Beauty and the Beast, California Wildflowers and Climate Change. Rob and Nita have generously offered to donate 20% of book sales within 24 hours of this event. We encourage you to buy a copy of this gorgeous coffee table book with photos that will transport you to meadows found in a variety of ecosystems throughout California, as well as thoughtful stories by various authors. My colleague Liz is playing tech support this evening, and she'll drop the link that you can use to purchase this book throughout the presentation. Rob and Nita, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I've been looking forward to taking a tour of the beautiful landscapes you're going to share with us ever since we were introduced. And without further ado, I'll hand the screen over to you and we can all get prepared to be treated with such beauty.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. We're really excited to do this for Daily Acts. We put together a special slideshow for you, And it focuses a lot on the meadows, from desert wildflower meadows to mountain meadows. We've been fortunate to find some meadows with a great variety of native plants, and we hope you can, whoever is doing gardening and wanting to create their own meadows will be able to incorporate a lot of diversity as well. So thank you for inviting us to be here. It's such a treat.
And hold on one moment, it's taking me, you're gonna get set. Close your eyes, everybody, or we started at the end because we were testing something earlier. So let me set this up. Oh, wait a minute. So I still need to share. Sorry about that. And you think we tested all this ahead of time.
We did.
There we go. So as Rob said, thank you all for coming tonight and joining us on our journey and Beauty and the Beast, California Wildflowers and Climate Change, 27-year journey.
Photographing California wildflowers up and down the state. And a few of the images you'll see later on in the presentation, a few of the flowers were taken out of state, but those flowers live in the state. So we told ourselves it was okay to put them in there. So this all started in the Antelope Valley, California Poppy Reserve in the Western Mojave Desert, which is about an hour's drive north of Los Angeles, back in 1992. I had been in a film lab processing some film in San Francisco where we lived at the time, and I was talking to a friend of mine who said, Rob, did you know the Antelope Valley, California Poppy Reserve is having a really, really good year with an abundance of flowers that they hadn't seen in almost a decade. She said, I'm sure you've been to the Poppy Reserve and photographed there. I said, no, actually I haven't. She said, you're a landscape photographer in California. I've never been to the Poppy Reserve. I said, kind of sheepishly, well, no. She said, you and I have to go. So she and another friend of ours and I, her name was Liz Hymans. Liz and a friend of ours and I drove down to the Antelope Valley, California Poppy Reserve, and we came across scenes just like this. It was a windy day, a couple days, so we couldn't photograph, but that evening, before we went to bed at our campsites, I called Nita and I said, Nita, I have just seen the most amazing wildflower bloom that I have ever seen. You can't believe what this is like to see the wind move in waves across acres and acres of beautiful California poppies. And this, I'm told, is a really good year because, as you can see in this image here, there was not only wonderful California poppies, but these beautiful purple bird's eye gilia that added a nice color balance. So this is what started it all. So in talking to Nita, I said, you know, you have to come down here. I'm going to come home and get you, and then we can spend some time photographing down here.
So I was a people photographer at the time. And so I was on assignment. That's why I couldn't go down with Rob initially. But when he called, I said, oh, I have to find time to do this. And we had both grew up in New England. So we never had wildflower blooms like this. We don't have a desert in New England. And so it was just such a treat. And we were hooked. From then on, we said, okay, we got to keep following the wildflowers. And for those of you who might have to leave early, we just want to let you know that you can find the book and more information on wildflowerbooks.com. So Rob and I met in a photo lab. I was waiting for my prints and this prince showed up. And at the time, as I said, I was a people photographer and Rob was focused mostly on nature and landscape photography.
And we met about 1986.
Well, 34 years later and 6 couples counselors later, we were still together and we had decided to focus on photographing wildflowers. as a joint project. And we'll tell you a little more about how that became our focus.
So people often ask, well, what's the oldest image in the book? This image I took in 1984. I was doing film in 1984 and I converted to digital in 2006. So this is a film image. I was looking for a nice landscape at the time with some pretty trees in it, with this beautiful buckeye, California buckeye, and I happened across these pretty purple flowers, which I did not know their name. And so later, as we did more photography, we learned the name of all these beautiful plants and these lupins. As someone said earlier, lupin is one of her favorite flowers, so we're glad to have lupin in here for you. As Nita said, when she mentioned, when we met, I had been a landscape photographer and I'd been doing that work for about 20 years. And that time my goal was to, get books, get images in books and calendars and magazines. And, I thought there's gotta be something more I can do with my work than just get it printed in beautiful publications. So I was fortunate, after contacting the Trust for Public Land in San Francisco, I was really fortunate to do over 30 different projects for them over a span of years. So the Trust for Public Land acquires private land and through government funding conveys it into the public land system. This land here was originally privately owned ranch land in the Sierra foothills, and eventually the Trust for Public Land conveyed it into Sequoia National Park as the park expanded. So I was really, really happy to be doing something related to conservation with my landscape and with my nature photography.
And the fuchsia flowers, I just drew a blank. Red bud. It's a red bud. Beautiful red buds that are found really early in the spring and bloom before they put out their leaves.
And Sonoma County does some beautiful red bud examples, I'm sure. So I had also been doing a lot of environmental issue photography, from documenting the effects of mining on public land to water issues and logging issues, and it was very depressing. It was just really heart-wrenching to go to some of these places and see how we have been spoiling the planet. And so I wanted to do something with beautiful nature photography that would still attract people to important environmental and conservation issues.
And as I mentioned, I was a people photographer. I did a series on the Children of the Tenderloin, which is an image on the right, which launched my career working to create healthy communities, human communities. The image on the left was actually taken when I was a firefighter. I worked for the what's now CAL FIRE, and I had a small Raleigh camera on my belt. And these were tires from land moving equipment, these giant black tires that had caught fire. So that's why the smoke was so black. So I spent a summer doing that. And then I worked on Alcatraz for the Park Service, a number of different jobs before I came back to San Francisco and started doing photography. And so the image on the left was a powwow in San Francisco. I was contacted by the Children's Defense Fund and asked to illustrate some of their calendars, and worked with a talented artist, Thea Schrack, who did the hand coloring for me. And then on the right, that's a picture of a 7-foot banner. And it was one of a number of projects that I did that were public art projects celebrating the diversity found in a number of different communities.
So we decided that we were going to do wildflower photography as much as we could, and we backpacked into Lake Winnemucca, which is around the top of Carson Pass, which is south of Lake Tahoe. And I was carrying about 85 pounds of gear, Most of that was camera gear and lighting equipment. I mean, whatever it took to get the beautiful wildflowers photographed in their natural environment. And Nita was carrying 65 pounds of gear. So we were up there for about three or 4 days. And it was a beautiful area because there was a lot of biodiversity. My understanding is that this is near convergence of a few different ecoregions. So there are quite a bit of different alpine and subalpine wildflowers in these areas.
A good place to see alpine meadows, and we'll show you some pictures as we go along. It's a fairly easy walk in. It's at Carson Pass. There's a visitor center and a parking lot. So it's one of the easier walks in, except when you're carrying 65 pounds. Rob decided to try coming in a different way, which was a lot harder. And I said, I'd never do that again. And when Rob says lighting equipment, you'll see we work with natural light. So we're not talking about strobes. We're talking about reflectors and backgrounds and that type of thing. And often, because we need to carry a lot, we will work close to our cars often. And in order to be able to pay for what we were doing, we were fortunate to connect with some art consultants and architects who were working on medical buildings. And this is an 8-foot tall, 20-foot wide translucent lobby divider. And this was one of 7 in this particular building, which is the Kaiser Redwood City Medical Center. And we had a total of 34 images that were built into the architecture.
So this was back in 2013. And whenever we could, we encouraged our art consultant to use native plants. These are obviously California poppies, and I developed a way to bring the petals of the flowers gently in contact with the lens, and I'll talk more about that technique later on.
And then when we don't have the wildflowers, we would go out at times in the wintertime to photograph birds. Also another topic or subject that was really popular for healthcare because it was very soothing. So this is the Woodbridge Ecological Preserve in Lodi. And the most amazing experience was at the Merced National Wildlife Refuge, where there were tens of thousands of Ross geese, which are smaller than snow geese, and the lesser sandhill cranes. And not only did you have the visuals, but you had the sounds. And there were very few people there. So we just had this almost private show.
So people ask us, well, what's your favorite wildflower bloom? And you know, we've seen probably 7 super blooms since we started back in 1992. And one of I'd say our favorite one is above the town of Gorman, which is on Interstate 5. It's the top of the grapevine going from Los Angeles north into the Central Valley. At the top of the grapevine, it's about 4,000 feet. Tejon Pass is near there. So from the bottom where the freeway goes through to the top of the ridges was 1,000 feet high. And these flowers extended for about 1.5 miles wide. This is a detail of these. Now we consider these meadows, even though they're not really meadows, but these images show the biodiversity that was found in the Tehachapi Mountains.
So every square inch seemed to be covered with some type of flower. It was just magical.
So this image was taken from Hungry Valley State Recreation Area in the foreground. You're looking east and the freeway goes through down at the bottom out of sight that you can't see. So when we said there was about 1,000 feet high of flowers, you can get a sense.
This is only part of that hillside on the other side. And it's private land, and we're hoping at some point that it becomes protected. And
what made this difficult but really interesting to photograph was the fact that we got there when there was a clearing storm, so the light was changing constantly. These beautiful shafts of light were shining through the dark clouds, and these shafts were moving. So, you know, it's the hardest thing to do was settle on a composition, because everything was so beautiful and so many things were changing so fast.
And then people want to know what our second favorite place was, and this was Carrizo Plain. Somebody mentioned it in chat. And Carrizo Plain in 2017, when they had the super bloom, and this is the Tembler Range, and we are coming across over the mountains from Bakersfield. And we especially love this image because you have all these flowers on the right side, and the hillside on the left had no flowers whatsoever. And then we were told, go to the Caliente Mountains on the west side of Carrizo Plain and go find the desert candles. We were fortunate that someone told us where to find them. And we had only seen a couple of desert candles in the past, but this was tens of thousands of them.
So when we were asked what was our favorite wildflower, well, this is mine. And looking from the Caliente Mountains, looking east across the Carrizo Plain National Monument, toward the Tembler Range, you can see how expansive this wildflower bloom was. And it continued to the north on the left-hand side and to the south on the right-hand side. And then further south, there were these areas of purple phacelia. I think someone mentioned in the chat that phacelia was their favorite flower. So I made this photograph, I put a road in it, so you really had a sense of scale of how expansive these beautiful flowers were. And then this is Nita's image taken down in those flowers. You took that with your iPhone, right?
Yeah, I took this with the iPhone. And at one point, when we were putting the book together, we looked at each other and we said, how many different cameras have we used over this 27-year period? And we figured out there was probably 12 different cameras, from our Canon film camera, Rob's Hasselblad medium format camera, to a number of generations of digital cameras, starting with Canon, a 17 megapixel camera, which at that time cost $8,000. And now we work with Sony cameras, mirrorless cameras, which we really like working with, much lighter, and you can see what you're doing right away.
And so our images look a lot like our floral portraits look like they've been made in a studio, and that's because we control the lighting. So, we like to tell people how it is we create the images out in the field. All floral portraits are done with the flowers safe and sound in the ground. And if Nita finds a beautiful specimen, as she often does, but we have to traipse through some of the ground and disturb something, we won't do it.
And can I just say, and
Sure.
This is a 2-page spread that you'll find in the book. It's called Behind the Scenes. So we will be showing you a lot of the images, a lot more images than you'll find in the book, but there are quite a few.
In the upper left-hand corner is the way we started out photographing flowers with black or white backgrounds. And most of the images in the book are probably either black or white backgrounds where the black has no texture, no detail to it. The point is to emphasize the flower with no distracting backgrounds. So after doing that for a while, and using different fabrics to put behind the flowers that were standing upright, I was getting kind of bored and frustrated with doing the same thing over and over. So I started to wrap the flowers with either white or black fabric. So on the right-hand side, the flowers, the alpine daisies in the middle, you can see that I'm wrapping these daisies with a fabric called chiffon. I went through 7 different types of fabrics to finally find something that had nice graceful curves to it. So to the right of that image, you can see where that flower lives at the top of Morgan Pass at 11,000 feet in the Sierra. So that was one technique that I developed. And the second technique I developed that I mentioned earlier was my contact series, where I was able to gently have the flower petals touch the front of the lens. And so what happens with that is because the light that would normally fall on the flower and illuminate it, that light was being blocked by the lens and the camera and by me. And so the light source was then the light coming from the background. Because it was coming from the background, it was transmitted light instead of reflected light. So this light being transmitted through the flower petals gave this beautiful, soft, ethereal feeling to the flowers. So it was a totally different way to do floral close-up photography, and added a whole dimension, and again broke the monotony of doing things the same way over the time, all the time. So doing it this way, it took a lot of images. I was not on a tripod. I was hand holding this. Doing it this way, it took a lot of images to come up with something good, but it was really fun because it was something different, and photographing this way was something was changing all the time.
So this image is one that probably took us the longest, 2.5 hours to do this image. I found this lily the night before, but it was getting too dark to photograph. So we came back just after sunrise to photograph it. And at that time, we were still working with film. Rob was working with a Hasselblad. In his hand is a Polaroid. He would use Polaroids to be able to see what the exposure and composition was like. So do you want to describe the lighting setup there?
Yeah, as Nita said, we came back in the morning, and the low morning light was coming from the left-hand side. So that side of the flower was nicely illuminated, but the front of the flower was in shade, and the right-hand side of the flower and the back of the flower was in shade. So, well, we had to bounce light into areas to evenly illuminate this whole scene. And then you can see the jackets that are piled on the left-hand side. Well, those are there to prevent the sun from shining on the soil and creating distracting highlights. So you can see what the final result was. And it took, like Nita said, 2.5 hours, but these were just amazing lilies. Normally this plant grows about 2 to 3 feet tall, with blossoms alternating going up to the top of the stem, and not a lot of blossoms. Well, as you saw in that earlier picture, this plant's probably only a foot tall, and this was in a high rainfall year, an El Nino rain year in 1998. So this plant was putting all its energy into creating buds and into creating blossoms. So you can see the buds, the 3 sets of buds there that would eventually become flowers. This was just a gorgeous lily.
So it was worth coming back for. And we live in Marin County, in Marin City, 5 miles north of the Golden Gate Bridge. And we're really blessed with having a county that has an amazing amount of biodiversity, from Mount Tamalpais to the bay to the ocean side. So it's given us a great choice of flowers. And here in this case, we're working with a white plexiglass, so it lets the light come through and makes even a brighter white background. So when we talked about what we're carrying, that's some of what's in Rob's pack.
So this was a film camera. We were up on Mount Tamalpais looking for the Calypso orchid. And I think someone in the chat said that was one of their favorite, image, these beautiful orchids. And so this just, we wanted to show what it would look like at eye level to look at these beautiful flowers. And so it meant spending an awful lot of time on the ground with, as close to the ground as I could get and still look through the viewfinder. But it was worth it because looking at the eye level was a really, really nice perspective to view these flowers.
And we were going through some video recently from my iPhone. I was fortunate that Rob was willing to go through the discomfort often to do the images, either hurting his neck ache or his back ache. I would often find the flowers. For me, it was like a treasure hunt, and would become more of the assistant. And he was willing to be physically uncomfortable and have the wonderful patience to get the right image. So we're always really fortunate. So the images are his, hers, and ours.
And mostly ours, because there's a lot of work that goes into not only finding them, and choosing the composition, but then all the editing, the Photoshop work. So it's mainly ours. That's why there are no credits under each photograph in the book. So again, here's an example of a setup. You can see we have white fabric underneath the black fabric. So often what took so much time is we'd try different compositions with different fabrics, either white or black behind. So we figured out at one point it took like an average of at least 45 minutes to do a flower.
To an hour, yeah. And then we'd come back and decide which one we liked better. And we always tried to work in a location that would not do damage. As you can see, we're right next to the road with the Indian pink, again on Mount Tam. And also looking for different angles, different ways to approach a flower and not always straight on. And you may or may not be able to see the aphids. So often we'll find, even later, we'll find out that they were bugs on the plant.
So Nita found this image the day before and we didn't have time because we had to be back. So I came back the next day and was lucky to find it. And again, the flowers are safe and sound in the ground. And this was the image that I finally came up with.
And we never pick the flowers. And we can often deal with wind as an issue, especially when you're by the coast. And this was in the Marin Headlands. So at times we would use actually this tent to try to block the wind. And this is one of the flowers you'll see in Marin County or the Bay Area late in the spring, called Farewell to Spring. And if you see a hillside with pink on it, that very often will be the Farewell to Spring.
So often I would try to find a different way to photograph the flower, not necessarily photograph the whole flower, but some interesting section of it. This was done in the Marin Headlands near Rodeo Beach. If people know where that is, go GGNRA. We're also talking about what our favorite flowers was. Well, as favorite flowers for scents, for smelling goes, it's the Western azalea. And this was taken on the old stage road up to Mount Tamalpais.
On Mount Tamalpais on the way to West Point Inn.
Yeah.
And sometimes they just feel like they're dancing.
This is Nita's setup for these beautiful iris.
And we drove 150 miles in order to get the an image that was earlier, which is the mountain lady slipper, because something we really wanted and someone told us it was available or that they could take us to them. So this is the Shasta iris, which is very different from the Douglas or ground irises we find here in the Bay Area.
And again, we did everything as close to the roadside so we wouldn't be disturbing any of the local environment. And this is one of the big diffusers we used. We'd often photograph the same plant in sunlight and sunshine And I mean, sunlight and in the shade or with a diffuser, and we'll talk about that later.
And if you want to experiment working with a diffusion disc, one of the things that's really fun is to bring it in close, move it back, the light will change, move it to the right or the left, and you'll have a different effect. In this case, with the diffusion disc behind it, the center of the flower or the hollow area became more translucent as the light came through it.
This is another example of the wrap series that I talked about, where I spent some time working with the folds of the fabric to complement the composition.
This is Ring Mountain, one of our favorite places in Marin County. That's Mount Tamalpais in the background. This is Ring Mountain in Corte Madera that was created as a preserve to protect the Tiburon mariposa lily, which is only found in 3 populations on this mountain and nowhere else in the world. And we'll show you a picture of that a little later.
As Nita mentioned, the behind the scenes images are in the back of the book, and we get reports that people really like that because they like to know how these flowers were photographed. Again, this is the alpine daisy at the top of Morgan Pass in the Eastern Sierra. It's about 11,000 feet.
And we found the chiffon to be the best fabric for beautiful folds, but it's also extremely light. So the slightest breeze and it changes your folds.
So that's why you see all the rocks around it.
So it's really challenging to work with. And this is the columbine, one of my favorite flowers. Where was this? This was up in
the same area. This is near Mosquito Lakes in the Eastern Sierra.
Again, trying to come up with a fold that complemented the geometry of the flower. And as Rob said earlier, sometimes we'll photograph in the sun, and other times we'll use diffusion discs. Again, this is Ring Mountain later in the season. And this is the same flower with a diffusion disc. So again, very different look to it. So we play around with the light, and we find with working with available light and reflectors to fill in on the bottom, etc., we actually get more variety than we would if we just use strobe.
And people, the really frequent question people ask and say, well, how much Photoshop do you do? Well, the answer is a lot, because in order to get back to what it was we saw, it takes quite a bit of work. For example, this image, this scene was photographed under blue skylight. There was only a little bit of sun falling on the scene. You can see in the very, very top up in the center how that's a little bit warmer. The digital cameras capture an image in a very, very low contrast so that you've got great detail in the highlights and great detail in the shadows. So the image is generally very soft and not much contrast. And also the digital camera captures, like I said, the color of the light falling on the scene. Well, our eyes adapt for that blue light, and this is what we actually saw.
Yeah, so that, and also very low in saturation as well. And so this is the blue light from the sky.
And this is what we actually saw, sorry. No, it's.
So this is what the camera captured, which was the actual light it saw, but our eyes corrected for it, and this is what we saw. Or our brains, I should say. We also, at times, needed to clean up the background. This was a fairly good sized plant, so we had to take a big sheet. And so we went in and we cleaned up the background. Everything has to go into Photoshop because everything has to be a digital file at some point.
But because we're doing wildflower photography and we want the colors to be accurate and not oversaturated, we spend a lot of time doing what we can to get what it was that we saw and to get the really accurate colors for the flowers.
And this is the 2-page spread in the book. And we forgot to mention, we co-published with the California Native Plant Society.
Oh, right. Milo Baker chapter, sorry. So again, here's another how it started. We had two pieces of fabric. We had to overlap. This was a beautiful, delicate Eriogonum we found about maybe 8,000 feet in the Sierra, right by the side of the road. This flower had some intense red, tiny blossoms at the end of each little stem, and it was windy, so there was a lot of dust blowing around.
A lot of sand. So we took it into Photoshop and cleaned it up.
And that's what we saw.
And brought it back to the colors we saw. And again, here it is in the book. And I mentioned we deal with wind. We also have had, and we deal with rain at times, and we've also had to deal with bugs. The worst experience we ever had with bugs was in Utah. We went to Capitol Reef National Park, and the no-see-ums, if any of you know what a no-see-um is, it's a tiny biting bug, much smaller than a mosquito. The bite is worse, and they can get into everything. So I am wearing a clean pair of underwear over my ears at this point and a bandana over my nose so that they won't climb into my ears or nose. And we are in the middle of nowhere. And within 3 minutes of finding these flowers and checking them out, we had the bugs everywhere. And this is what Rob was dealing with. Had over 200 bites on him after we spent about a week in Capitol Reef photographing wildflowers.
Yeah, we were completely covered up, but these little suckers would just crawl up your sleeves, and I just hated them.
So we had been photographing wildflowers, and Rob was invited to submit a project idea to Blue Earth Alliance. It's a nonprofit organization that supports photographers doing documentary projects on the environment, on endangered cultures, on social issues. So Rob came up with my help, Beauty and the Beast, Wildflowers and Climate Change. Because at the time we were photographing throughout the West, not just California. And we met the curator of the Jewett Gallery at the San Francisco Main Library, and she invited us to submit a proposal to do an exhibit that was California-based. And that was the origin of Beauty and the Beast, California Wildflowers and Climate Change. And this was back in 2016. I mentioned earlier the Mariposa, Tiburon Mariposa lily. It's fairly small in here, but on the left side, underneath the Western California words, is the Tiburon Mariposa lily, which is a very odd looking lily that's almost all browns and dark burgundies. And so we had 100 images in this exhibit and a map in the back, which you can also find in the book that CNPS State Office put together for us on the 14 different ecological regions of California. And in the foreground is a case that has a number of the books that we've used as guidebooks, and also a pair of knee pads that we found that were donated by Ergodyne. And I will put that into the chat, because if you ever need good knee pads for gardening or for photographing, we hike with them on, and they are like kneeling in stiff jello. They have made such a difference in the work that we were doing. And we also want to thank Think Tank, which is a company, a local company actually up in Santa Rosa, that creates carrying bags and belts, et cetera, for photographic equipment. And it was really the only way that Rob could have the cameras around his waist while he had all the other equipment in the pack. We are very excited to let you know that last week they were hanging at the San Diego Natural History Museum, a new exhibit that will be up for at least a year. And hopefully they're going to open January 15th. That is their plan. And it's called California Blooming. And it's a large print version of our traveling exhibit that's been moving around California. And if anybody knows of a place that wants to do the Exhibit Envoy now has a 52 image or 52 print image exhibit that is available for rent to small and medium-sized venues.
And so far it's been seen by 45,000 people
Yeah.
since what, 2017?
2018, I think. And so we wanted to create a book that was a companion to the exhibit, because the exhibit's purpose was to use art to inspire action. We use the art to attract attention and words to educate and inspire hope and action. So we came up with a diverse group of scientists, environmental leaders, and nature writers, ranging in age from 20 to 82.
And we'll talk more about the short first person essays, the short stories that all these different authors wrote that we've paced throughout the book.
And so it became a very collaborative project. We never could have done this on our own. So it's a collaboration of many different organizations.
So the book is divided into 3 sections, and the essays are loosely related to each section. So the first one is The Gift of Beauty. The next one is The Human Connection. And the third one is Ensuring the Future. So there are 254 pages. It's a 5.5-pound book. It's really hefty. And there are 198 190 images of landscapes and floral portraits. So we take you from the high Sierra, these alpine rock gardens, down to below sea level in Death Valley.
So this was written by Gordon Lepick, who's a scientist with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. And he wrote the story on wildflowers and climate change. And it's from, there's a personal aspect to each story. Ryan Burnett, who works with Point Bluke Science Conservation, is doing research in the alpine meadows on the effects of climate change on the rufous hummingbird.
That image was taken at Carson Pass, very, very close to where you saw someone had taken our portraits with all our backpacks on. So in the distance that you
Sorry.
that you can't see below the ridges of that mountain is Winnemucca Lake. So it's only about a 40-minute hike out to this beautiful meadow that's got an amazing diversity of flowers. So Ryan Burnett did this story on phenology, which is the timing of natural events. And his story talks about the migration of the rufous hummingbird from its winter grounds in New Mexico all the way to its... Huh?
In Mexico, actually.
Yeah.
You said New Mexico.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. In Mexico all the way to its breeding grounds in Alaska, and how as the bird moves farther north, these meadows have to be blooming at just the right time so the bird has its nectar, has its fuel all along the way. So he talks about how climate change is changing the phenology, the timing of these things, with less precipitation, meaning less snowfall and warmer temperatures. The flowers are coming out and they're blooming sooner, and so often the flowers are gone before the birds get there.
So it not only affects the pollinators, but it also can affect the flowers that need specific pollinators if they don't meet up at the same time, and then they don't produce the seeds that are needed for the next generation.
Go back. This was the luckiest image that we've we've taken photographing wildflowers. I had the camera on the tripod. Nita was holding a big black background because this flower is probably about 3 feet tall. There was a slight breeze, so I had to have a fast shutter speed to stop the movement of the flower. I had just created the right exposure. I had my finger on the remote release. I was looking through the viewfinder. This bird flew in. I got 2 frames and the bird was gone. Well, we waited about a half an hour longer to see if the bird would come back, and it didn't. So like I said, this is the most serendipitous, the luckiest photograph that we've made photographing wildflowers. We've never been able to get a bird like this in that position for the flower again, but sometimes we get beautiful insects on the flowers as well.
And this one really cooperated. It allowed us to put a background behind it and stayed there for a while. So we, this is some of the wording from the National Wildlife Federation about pollinators and how we need to protect them.
So our favorite places to photograph are in the deserts. My understanding is California is 25% desert. There are 5 deserts classified in the state, and there are over 250 species of wildflowers in the Mojave Desert, I understand.
So Susan Twite did a story on the desert. Robin Wall Kimmerer, some of you may know her. She's a Native American botanist and professor at SUNY in New York. And she wrote this wonderful story about what's in a name from the perspective of Native American botanist and what her experience was with her grandmother naming the wild strawberry. And she wrote actually just recently, I think Bay Nature did put something out about the fact that she just did a new version of Braiding Sweetgrass, which is a wonderful book that she's written. Wendy Takuda, some of you may remember her. She was a news anchor in KPIX. And when she retired, she got involved in doing restoration work and pulling brooms. So this is her very funny story about Zen and the art of pulling broom. Amber Paris, who's with Climate Kids in San Diego and also with Climate Science Alliance, and responsible for us getting the exhibit into the San Diego Museum of Natural History. She wrote about talking to children about climate change without scaring them.
And this was a beautiful flower we found at Point Reyes National Seashore on the way out to Limantour Lagoon, I think. And the flower is called the candy flower, and it has these beautiful silvery iridescent petals to it.
Yeah, we thought that was appropriate for the children's section. And Genevieve Arnold is with the Theodore Payne Foundation, and she wrote, she manages their seed bank, and she wrote about seed banking. Theodore Payne Foundation is a great source for native plants with their nurseries, especially for Southern California. They're near San Diego.
No, Pasadena.
They're in Pasadena.
Yeah.
That's near San Diego.
Okay.
LA, sorry. Yes, Pasadena. And they also have a hotline in the spring so you can find what's blooming where.
So we also have a section in the book on fire ecology, fire recovery, what happens after a fire has gone through. This is a fire poppy we photographed in Cleveland National Forest in the Santa Ana Mountains in Southern California. So we've got floral portraits of the flowers that have come up and some landscapes of what has returned when the fire has gone through.
This is in Lake County. A few years back when they were having a whole series of really horrific fires. And it really can do a lot of destruction to people and to the land. And it also provides provides sunlight for the flowers and fertilizer from the ash. So the wildflowers can do really well after fires. And this was only 6 months after a fire just went through and destroyed the area. So the native plants can be very resilient, especially the bulbs.
This was in Lake County, this whole meadow and the photograph after it was totally burned. If you look at the soil that these plants are growing out of, the soil was charred. But there's this wonderful resurgence of life that has come back after these wildfires. This was taken at Pepperwood Preserve in Sonoma County, and you can see in the upper left part of the frame that all these trees had been burned. Again, the soil right where I'm standing and all around was all charred. Now, I got into this area walking on top of invasive grasses. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been in here.
So I had been wanting to find a red monkey flower for a long time, and we finally found it in the Santa Ana Mountains after the fire.
And Nita found these two flowers associated with each other naturally, and so
bird's eye gilia and the poppy, and also in Pepperwood. And the Pepperwood burn area was from the Tubbs fire, which was the one that really devastated Santa Rosa. And I think they've had 2 or 3 fires, including that one, in the last few years on their property.
And this is Nita's image in Death Valley of the desert, of the wide expanse of desert sunflowers down at the bottom.
This was during a super bloom a number of years ago. And one of the things that we found is that when we first started photographing wildflowers in 1998, we went to Death Valley, they had a 100-year bloom. 5 years later in 2007, 7 years later in 2005, they had another super bloom. I mean, it's a 100-year bloom, only 7 years later. And a 100-year bloom was when the conditions came together just right, that you have these massive display of flowers. Well, these were starting because of climate change, because you'd have the droughts and then you would have a lot of rain. They were happening so often, they stopped calling them 100-year blooms, and they're now called super blooms.
So our favorite places to photograph have been in the desert. So we'll go through a few of California's deserts. This is Death Valley. Go back. And again, this is another view of the desert sunflower. We took this photograph after the sun had set, so there was this beautiful, soft, glowing light in the west falling on the scene.
So that initial image, which had the that I mentioned about the super bloom, where the valley was just filled with flowers, you go to another part of the park and there was almost nothing. And if you looked closely, you could find some really unusual flowers like this broom rape in among the gravel. I always love to watch for insects. This was also in that area. And this was our first experience in Death Valley during that 1998 100-year bloom. And we would go out for 3 to 4 weeks at a time when we would have blooms like this, if we could get away.
Another beautiful park we love photographing in is in Joshua Tree National Park. And Joshua Tree is a beautiful park because it incorporates 2 different deserts. In the north is the Mojave, and on the southern part is the Sonoran Desert. So you'll get different plants in each part of the park. Now, in the southern part, you see these desert washes. On an average year, this is what you might find is for wildflowers. You'll find a Canterbury bells scattered here and there. Well, in 1998, with this El Nino rains, these abundant rains, the seed bank sprouted with so much moisture filtering into this granitic soil. So the plants, there were not only a lot of plants, but they grew quite tall for a long period of time. So there was quite an abundance of beautiful flowers.
And some plants will close up early. So we found out the hard way that this one starts to close up at 3 in the afternoon. Think of the dandelion as not something so beautiful, but when you find the desert dandelion, it can just be gorgeous.
And then our next park is Anza Borrego Desert State Park, which is in the very southern part of the state. And this is in the Sonoran Desert.
And this was 2005 during their 500-year bloom. It's very different plants. This is the two-page spread that includes the desert lily and a desert chicory.
So often it's really interesting to look from beneath the blossom up into it with the sunlight shining through it to get a different perspective. So I'm not always including the whole shape of the blossom in there. Then where it all started in Antelope Valley, California Poppy Reserve.
When we showed you the Gorman pictures with the dark clouds, this was the other side of the hills in Antelope Valley.
And I said earlier, some of the images were taken out of state, but these species live in the state. So we told ourselves it's okay to put them in. And then we're always looking for interesting natural backgrounds for these flowers. This was some beautiful serpentine rock that we found in the Sierra foothills.
One of our favorite places to go also is Table Mountain near Chico. Very volcanic area and with really interesting variety of flowers and very open landscape.
So these are all images from the book.
These are the two-page spreads found in the book. And we're gonna move through them so that you can
have time to do the rest of your program. Just one quick thing. We mentioned the Tiburon Mariposa lily. Well, on the left page, those two blossoms at the top on the right-hand side in the black background, that's the Tiburon Mariposa lily. Really strange looking lily.
Orchids are always fun to find.
And then the book has a glossary because we have 18 short stories, short essays. So there are scientific terms or many terms that the average person might not know. So we wanted to include that. It's got two indices, a plant name index and a location index. So if you want to see, well, what flowers did they photograph in Death Valley or what flowers on Mount Tamalpais, you can find that. And also, as we mentioned earlier, it has a map of the 14 different bioregions, ecoregions in the state.
Now we'll show you that in a bit. And one of the essays that we have also that I didn't mention is called You the Change Maker. And it includes 25 different things you can do to make a difference. And so here are just a handful of them. Vote for earth-friendly candidates. Oops, sorry for the phone, forgot to unplug it. Plant local native plants in your garden. And that's what we're gonna talk about later on. So that, no, it's the one in the hallway, Rob. Plant local native plants in your garden. And we're gonna talk about how to create meadows. Join your local chapter of the California Native Plant Society and get involved with them. And donate to climate change and conservation organizations and organizations like Daily Act that are doing some really good work. And we wish we could meet you in person now that we know about you, but that'll happen soon. Volunteer to support restoration work. So once you can get out again, check your local CNPS chapters. If you're not in the Petaluma area, there are 35 chapters throughout the state, and they're also native plant societies throughout the country. And so here's just a few images of meadows.
That we added for you.
Oh, I forgot to delete the other one. This was in Lake County again after the fire, and Antelope Valley. So a lot of different types of meadows depending on where you live. And here's the 2-page spread with the map that that Rob mentioned. And people ask us, how do we identify plants? Well, as I mentioned, we use plant ID books. There's a new website called plantid.net, or relatively new, which is wonderful for identifying plants. Came out of the Marin chapter of CNPS. Flora is another website which has wonderful photographs and maps telling you what grows where. And one of the wonderful things about this is there are a lot of citizen scientists who are contributing to this website. And one of the stories in our book talks about becoming a citizen scientist.
And we also had a lot of help, an awful lot of help from different CNPS chapters and different members. We'd call people in chapters far away from us and ask them, tell them what we were working on and where should we go. And there were so many friendly people. So we couldn't have done what we did without the California Native Plant Society.
And this is their website, Calscape, which helps you find what plants are best for your local area. So it's a great resource. And this was why we did this book. This is a great quote by David Brower. And it says, "Truth and beauty can still win battles. We need more art, more passion, and more wit in defense of the earth." So we just want to let you know we have the regular edition books that are available at wildflowerbooks.com, as well as a deluxe signed limited edition. And remember that 20% of any sales in the next 24 hours go to support Daily Act. And if you get the limited edition book, which has a dust jacket, if you get the regular edition book, which has a dust jacket, please remember to pull it back and look at the book cover underneath. Really, our book designer, Laura Lovett, who is on the board of the Marin chapter of CNPS, was the director of book design for Chronicle Books. So she was great to work with on this project. So we want to thank you for joining us on our journey of Beauty and the Beast, California Wildflowers and Climate Change. If you want to learn more about us besides the book, you can go to winterbadger.com. My last name being Winter, Rob's Badger. We lucked out. And we encourage you to check out wildflowerbooks.com. Most of the images, except for the setups, are in the book. So we thank you for joining us. And I disappeared. There I am.
My gosh, Rob and Nita, thank you so much for sharing your beautiful, beautiful, beautiful art with us. It was such a treat to be able to see those photos. And I love seeing the behind the scenes photos too, because you see that what you're taking is not effortless. It takes hours for you to set up those photos, and oftentimes getting on your hands and knees or laying on the ground or having all different types of draping and lighting. Those really, I learned a lot being able to see your process, and really just
thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Really such a treat. So we are going to get started with our Q&A portion, which is always a really fun and lively portion of the event. And we are joined here by two panelists. I'd like to introduce Allison Titus, who is the Community Education Program Manager with the Laguna Foundation. And she's also going to be our MC, and she'll be facilitating the Q&A tonight. And then we also have April Owens, who is the Horticultural Chair with CNPS Milo Baker Chapter. And she's also the executive director of Habitat Corridor Project. So we are in good hands with really knowledgeable experts here. And we encourage you to ask all of your questions about how you might be able to implement a native wildflower meadow in your own landscape. They're wonderful alternatives to some of that higher water use turf, and they bring so many other benefits like habitat for all of our pollinators, beauty, and so much more. So without further ado, I will pass this off to Allison and she can get us started with our Q&A. Thank you so much, Allison.
Thank you, Annie. Thank you, Daliax. And thank you, Rob and Nita. It was really a treat. I will kind of address some questions in the chat before moving to the Q&A to give those of you who are sticking around some time to get your questions in the Q&A, which you can find if you hover your cursor over your black Zoom screen. You can click on the Q&A and ask a question there. But there are some questions in the chat that I definitely, for Rob and Nita, that I wanted to address quickly before we move to talking about Meadows. Someone noted that in one of the behind the scenes photos that you showed us, there were some stuffed animals. And inquiring minds want to know the story behind those.
I didn't want to take too much time giving the presentation, so I didn't mention them.
I forgot.
But
Zorro.
I mean, you have to keep them in front of you. That's Zorro. It's Rob's spiritual advisor and art critic. And he goes everywhere. And then we didn't have children of our own for a number of reasons, including population. And you can't travel with live animals and do this type of work. So we found this family of animals, from bears to ducks to horses to snakes, that travel with us. So in that photograph, there was Zorro, there was Count Some Bunny, and Cosmic Bunny.
And Cosmic Bunny.
So
they all help.
I love that. I'm really glad somebody asked.
Yeah, me
I'm curious too.
I wanted to bring him in early to start the whole thing, and so I'm going to hear it later on.
So we're going to start loading some more pictures with them in the field to our Instagram account that we're building.
Yeah.
So stay tuned to Instagram, and I'll put on the thing on the chat at Beauty Beast Wild.
Perfect. Great. Well, thank you. There were some other questions in the Q&A that one of which you answered. You don't pick the flowers in order to photograph them, which is amazing that you're able to get such clear, crisp, and beautiful shots without doing that. So that is wonderful. And thank you for mentioning that that is part of your practice. Feel free to add questions in the Q&A. I'll give you some time if you have questions for Rob and Nita, or questions about how to bring California native plants into your own yard. Feel free to add them now. But some of you may have joined and are wondering how to get started with bringing some of this beauty into your own space. And we are so fortunate to have April here with us and Daliax and these experts on the panel to talk about how to get started with that process. If you have a space, April, and you would like to bring some piece of a meadow into your yard, some of this beauty we just saw, what are some good first steps?
So funny, because my cat just discovered my touch screen, so I'm gonna move her. Zoom problems. We were talking about earlier, we talked about meadows a lot, but one of the key pieces to establishing a meadow or placing your lawn is really prepping the space and getting rid of your weeds, and especially Bermuda grass or crabgrass or turf. So Daliax is like the experts at sheet mulching. So maybe Annie could talk about that for a minute, and then I could talk about a couple of approaches to creating a meadow.
Sure. So when we look at converting a turf to a native landscape, we start with a process called sheet mulching. And sheet mulching has many different benefits. And one of them is building soil, and the other one is weed suppression. So what we do is we put down 1 inch of compost and then 2 layers of cardboard. And that cardboard is what suppresses weeds by blocking out light. And then we cover that with 3 inches of mulch. And then we like to give that a good watering. And often, if you can do this in the fall and let the rainy season help decompose that cardboard, that helps build up your soil. And that cardboard is a really wonderful platform for all sorts of mycelium and beneficial bacteria that will make your soil so much healthier and so much more receptive to planting. And then from there, you have kind of a blank slate, and you can start your landscaping process. However, when you do have Bermuda grass or crabgrass or other really invasive species, it can be really challenging, and sheet mulching isn't always enough to get rid of them. And then you have to be really diligent at hand weeding after you've sheet mulched. Roots that grow through cardboard are a lot easier to pull. And so your work is a lot easier, but you still will have to do some of that hand weeding.
So you said 1 inch of compost, 3 inches of cardboard, and how much of mulch?
3 inches of cardboard.
Two layers of cardboard, and then yeah. And
That's a lot of cardboard.
It's a 1, 2, 3. It's a 1 inch of compost, 2 layers of cardboard, and then 3 inches of
got it.
Of mulch. And you can add more layers of cardboard depending on how bad your weeds are. So you can use a thicker cardboard or an extra layer if you're really trying to block out some invasive species.
And then so the plant layer, there's a couple ways to go about it. There's the slow and the faster way. And so we oftentimes approach, and Liz will put a couple of links in here about some resources we have. But there's a great article from the Native Grasslands Association that a PDF that really goes deep into describing how to do the slow version of a wildland meadow, which is, the first year you seed or get your native grasses in, and then they suggest that your wildflowers go in later because they'll shadow out the little native grass seeds. Or you can fake it to create a native meadow with native bunch grasses and native perennials. It's a little easier to do than getting the wildflower meadow happening. So I've been doing this for like 20 years, creating native plant landscapes, and Mother Nature does it so much better than any of us can do it. So we've started to figure out a way to make it so that we can take out your lawn and get it a little faster. After the sheet mulching, you can add some bunch grasses and some native salvias and monkey flowers. So you can really create that beautiful native meadow look in a quicker way. We have a demonstration garden at the Living Learning Landscapes in Santa Rosa at the JC that you can check out those free website. And I'll get those links in there.
Perfect. Thank you. That is great information to get started. And I just want to remind folks that if you're choosing to bring this into your yard, there's so many benefits to trying to do even a little bit of this in your own space. Those bunch grasses that April was talking about, they store carbon. They just do great things for the environment, and you will attract other visitors, as Rob and Nita mentioned and captured in some of their photos. You will draw pollinators and native birds and all kinds of critters to your yard. So there's lots of reasons to try and bring some of this to your own home. We did have a question here in the chat about bringing meadows into a home garden. They can be very high maintenance. And some plants tend to overwhelm the smaller, more fragile species. What are suggestions from this panel to address some of these issues, maybe around maintenance and then species diversity in the garden?
April, I think you addressed this when you talked about mimicking nature by using perennials. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that? And then I can address some of the maintenance as well.
You're muted.
Wildflowers, like I said, are really like there's a few things in California native plant gardening that are kind of high, like next level. Like milkweed is a plant that oftentimes your garden needs to be established first, and then you add in some plants. And so some of the great perennials will really give you that first jump forward in your landscape. And thinking about shrubs as well, I think we oftentimes think of a perennial meadow as just grasses, but backing up and thinking about your landscape in terms of the structure as well. So even in a perennial meadow that we design, we'll have some coffee berries or some toyon to set that foundation. So when the garden is quiet, and when you need to do that maintenance to cut things back and you still have a beautiful garden happening.
Can you talk a little bit more about maintenance if you were to have, say, a more structured garden with perennials and then you wanted to have a smaller patch? This is kind of a personal question too.
No, I love it. Yeah.
If you were to have a smaller patch of area that you did seed with wildflowers, how would you then maintain that after they've bloomed?
The key with wildflowers that I've learned, and even in my little garden, I'm a landscape designer and architect, and I have to say my garden is just a mess and I'm never out there. And there's like a few little native wildflowers that have really always come back, and they actually are in some of the rock mulch that I have in the front yard, linum, and some other things, some poppies and things. So it's nice to have like that structure, like I said, and then have like a little wild space and give the wildflowers that space to spread. And so maybe there's a few masses in your landscape. So you set up the structure, and then at the corners or along your pathways, you could do rock mulch or sand and seed in those spaces. So you start yourself up for success with smaller patches where you can weed out the non-natives, which are sometimes tough to find, especially when creating a meadow with native grasses, because it's really hard to tell the difference between native grasses and non-native grasses. So it's just those first couple of years, like we talked about at the beginning, like getting the maintenance down and then learning like what the different leaf structure looks like, and setting yourself up for success in that space.
Excellent. Thank you. There are more questions coming in the chat than we have time to answer, but I will just address a couple really quickly with regards to fire safe landscaping. April is a part of the Resilient Landscapes Coalition here in Sonoma County, and I would highly recommend checking them out. We can include that link in the follow-up email. There's a lot of great information there. I love this question. How do you talk to your neighbors about transitioning to native landscaping? There are a lot of great resources about this as well. Some of the benefits we mentioned, but April mentioned, like the low maintenance in general of California native plants. We talked about the great habitat that they provide. They're also generally low water, which is a great and ever more important benefit of these gardens. So that is a great entry point, and I would recommend looking at CNPS and CalScape for more resources if you plan to go and talk to your neighbors about California native plants, which I love that idea.
There's this beautiful thing where once neighborhoods, like I noticed that once you do one landscape, it like everybody will change over. It's just showing people how beautiful it can be, and then it's changing your aesthetic around a landscape.
Yes, definitely. As you can see, I mean, the aesthetic beauty is no small benefit as well.
It's so fun with the butterflies and the hummingbirds. You get so much more life there.
Yes. And then Rob and Nita, we had a couple questions on the same topic of how do you anticipate a super bloom? We've just got about a minute left. Are there any conditions you look for? And
this year's definitely not a good year so far.
Yeah, so far.
So you need rain. You need rain at certain times of the year, continuous rain, as well as not too hot when the flowers are blooming. So there are a number of different things. El Nino years are generally better than La Nina, which is what we're having right now. And then we have a minute to answer about dealing with crowds?
Wait, there's something else.
Oh.
Yeah, there is a really good website. It's called desertusa.com.
Yeah,
desertusa.com.
Somebody put it into the chat already.
And so they have weekly updates on what's happening, not only in the deserts, but in different parts of the West where people are finding flowers. People send pictures and things like that. There's a little bar thing that they give. So that's a good,
they're about to lose their time.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great. And I would just add, looking for, if you can go during the week, that's great. If you can go to lesser known areas through some of this research, that's great. There's often areas right outside the national park that have the same flowers. If you can just do a little bit of digging, I think that could help spread us out until there's better infrastructure for the tourism around super blooms, which is a really cool thing, even if it's, not ideal for the flowers in some ways. So
and
it
Allison,
is.
If you want to send us any of the questions that we didn't get to answer, we can send you the answers so that you can put it into the follow-up email if you like.
Perfect.
Wonderful.
Yeah, we will try to include some of these resources definitely in that follow-up email. It'll be full of great information. Thank you all for your questions and for your comments. There's so much great information here that you all are sharing. And I just wanted to emphasize that, so April is the horticulture chair of our local chapter of the California Native Plant Society. It is a wonderful organization to get involved with. It's a relatively cheap membership, and you get a subscription to a couple beautiful publications. If you liked this webinar, that is a great organization to get involved with as well. So I wanted to plug that. They have general meetings over Zoom now once a month. That's a great way to check it out, and we'll include that link as well. So thank you all. I'm going to hand it back to Annie to close us out.
Before we sign off, I just wanted to tell you all about a couple of upcoming events that we have. And remind you that within 24 hours, 20% of those sales do go to Daily Acts, and we really appreciate your support and get your beautiful book.
And thank you to the 3 people who have already bought books.
Oh, wonderful. Yes,
wow.
Thank you. I wanted to let you all know that Bioneers is coming up. Bioneers is a wonderful, it's now going to be a virtual event where you can find inspiring speakers with so much knowledge talking about a wide range of topics. Our own executive director is going to be giving the keynote at Bioneers this year, as well as 2 other people with Daily Acts will be facilitating workshops. And we really encourage you all to check those out. It's a new format that they're trying out where you do have to, you end up paying for each piece that you see. So it makes it a little more accessible if you just want to see one piece, and then you can kind of browse and check out what you want to watch. So we really encourage you to check that one out. And then I want to pass it over to Allison so she can talk about 2 events that are coming up with Laguna Foundation.
Yeah, if you're still with us, just real quick, you can go to the community education page at the Laguna Foundation's website. We will have a panel Thursday night, 5 o'clock this week, all about the working lands of the Laguna watershed. So we'll have some panelists that do agricultural work around the watershed with conservation in mind. And then I'll be giving a webinar next week about how to kayak on the Laguna, all the tips and tricks for how to get out there on the water.
All right. Thank you so much to everybody for being here, for participating in the webinar, for dropping links and sharing knowledge in the chat, for asking questions, and for taking time to join us tonight. We really appreciate you all. And if you would like to get in touch with any of us, our email addresses are here, and feel free to ask us any questions, and we will be sending out a follow-up email with the resources and links, as well as a link to the recording that you can view and pass on to other people so that they can take part in this beauty as well.
Thanks, Rob and Nita. Thanks, everybody.
Oh my gosh, Rob and Nita,
Okay.
that was an amazing workshop. I mean, amazing presentation.
Such a
Absolutely.
treat.
Such a treat.
You're losing Zorro's head.
Oh, no.
Here he is.
I need to go backpacking much more now.
Yeah.
Wow.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you for
Have a
having me.
wonderful
I
evening.
really enjoyed it.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.